Afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where in the world you are based. You're hearing my voice. I'm Carolyn Quinlan. I'm the head of community here at Collision Conference, and I'm calling today from Dublin in Ireland, where our HQ is based. You can't see me as I'm working in an open office, and there's any number of people and things going on behind me here, but I'll come to you in audio format. I'm delighted to be here today with Elizabeth and Adol from Long Mangalji. We have partnered with them to give you guys the very best information on how to apply for a visa if you're entering Canada for the first time or as a repeat or a return attendee in preparation for the Collision Conference. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Elizabeth and Adol. Feel free to submit your questions in the box below, and Elizabeth will come back to them towards the end of this seminar. But I hope you find this.
Thanks, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm an immigration lawyer here in Canada. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to go over some of the things that you need to know if you want to come to Canada to attend the Collision Conference. I have with me here, Adol, who is going to be helping you answer some Q&As. So let me just do some housekeeping here first. As you'll see here, this is a screenshot of the screen that you probably will see. If you click on the Q&A button right over here, you'll be able to ask questions during my presentation, and Adol will be there to answer the Q&As. And at the very end, Adol might pose some of your questions or other questions we have received from other people, and we'll have a little discussion at the end. Okay? Thank you so much, Adol.
I look forward to your questions.
Thanks. Okay. All right. So let's first talk about what happens when you get to the airport. To get on the plane, you'll need to have your immigration documents ready. They will likely not even allow you to get on the plane from your home country without them, okay? And at the airport, when you go through the Canadian airports, if you're coming through Pearson, what we have right now is we have the passport screening through the machines. So most of you will go through the machines. That being said, some people may still get pulled out and have questions with the CBSA officers, and you'll have to be ready to explain what you're doing in Canada, even if you have your visas or your ETAs with you. The best thing to do is to keep that letter that you have from Collision with you to show your purpose in Canada, and keep your tickets ready, to show when you're going to be leaving Canada. Also, now a lot of times your passport may not be stamped by officers. Oftentimes, though, passports being stamped is a very good record to show when you legally entered Canada, and that also shows how long you have to stay in Canada, because the default in Canada is that if you enter Canada, you can stay in Canada 6 months unless the officers say otherwise. But if you don't have a stamp on your passport, that can be difficult. It's one thing to fly in, you'll have your ticket to show evidence, but oftentimes when people are driving in, for example, from the States, and there's no passport stamp, there's no evidence that you've entered Canada on which date. So oftentimes, if you ask the officer, can I please have my passport stamped just so that I have a record of when I entered, they should then stamp your passport, okay? About the immigration documents you'll need. Do you need a visa? I will be sending out these slides, and we'll be recording this as well. And if you want to have a slide and you don't receive it, please let me know. But these are some of the links that I've included for you to check on certain things. So not everyone requires a visa to enter Canada. It really depends on your nationality. If you have, you're national of countries that need a visa, and you can go on this website to check if you do need a visa, then you'll need to apply for a visa. If you don't need a visa, unless you're an American or Canadian citizen, you will need to have an ETA. And this is, and so if you are visa exempt, you don't need a visa, and you are flying into Canada. If you're driving into Canada, you don't necessarily need an ETA. But if you're flying into Canada, you do need an ETA, and you're not an American or Canadian citizen. Americans don't need an ETA. You can just show up at our border and ask to enter Canada, okay? So let's first talk about the easier one to apply for, which is an ETA. These are for people who, like I said, are visa exempt, okay? And you're flying to Canada, you're not an American or Canadian citizen. So first of all, if you're not sure if you need an ETA, here's the website for you to see. Do you need an ETA? Do you need a visa? Okay. And then applications for ETAs for 99% of people are very simple. You simply go onto this website, you answer a few simple questions about yourself, and usually it's generated in a few minutes' time. Now, there often, though, can be issues if you are applying for an ETA. If you don't receive it in a few minutes of time, then, you know, and you don't receive it, for example, even by the next day, there could be an issue with your ETA application. For example, if you have had previous visas or ETAs refused. Okay, sometimes, for example, Mexican citizens, for a while back then, you needed visas to come to Canada, and now you don't need a visa. But if you did apply for a visa before and it was rejected, and you apply for ETA now, it could still very well be rejected or put into secondary, which can take a long time sometimes to evaluate as to whether or not they want to give you that ETA. If you have criminal records, you may be inadmissible to Canada. You may be. Not all people who have criminal record are inadmissible to Canada, but this could be a red flag, and either your ETA could be rejected or it could go into secondary as well. And then on the ETA, they do ask whether or not you have serious medical conditions. These are the ones that they list. Coronavirus is not on this list, okay? But if you have any of this, you know, they may then put you into secondary and take a further look. They may need you to submit medical documents for this. Okay, let's move on to how to apply for a visa. The simpler one to do is normally to go online, and you can apply online for your visa. Now, where you your application is assessed is very important, because there are oftentimes different processing times for where your application is assessed. Your application can be assessed at a visa post of where you are a citizen, or you can also have it assessed where you have been legally admitted. That is where you are legally there, okay? So for example, if I am an Indian national, but I have a H-1B visa in the States, I don't need to have the New Delhi visa post assess my application. I can have my application assessed in the New York visa post, okay? Now, especially if you apply by paper, the visa posts will have oftentimes have their own document checklist that they want you to submit. Even for online, I still go to these visa post websites because and look at the documents, because oftentimes the officers who are assessing at that visa post, they will want to see specific documents specific to that visa post, okay? You will also need to give biometrics, which are your fingerprinting and your iris scans. And normally they will give you, once you submit your application for your visa, they will then give you instructions and tell you to go for your biometrics. There are biometric centers around the world. Normally, if you're outside of Canada, you will be going to the visa application centers to get this done, okay? Now, people often ask me, what do I have to submit for your visa? Well, everyone is different, but let me go through some of the main things that you have to consider, that you have to prove when you are applying for a visa. First of all, you need to tell the officer why you're coming to Canada. If it's a legitimate purpose, for the purpose of visiting Canada, okay? Because if you're applying for a visitor visa, there's only certain things you're allowed to do in Canada. So one of the best ways to do this is to get a letter from Collision, okay? Buy your ticket and get a letter from Collision. And Carolyn will go through the process as to how to do that at the end, okay? Then this is the reason that most visas, if they're rejected, this is normally on the letter. Normally if a visa is rejected, the officer will say, I don't believe that this person will leave Canada when they're required to do so. And this is a many multifaceted reason. Basically, the law is that an officer has to can reject your visa if they don't believe that you will leave Canada when you are required. And so what do you have to show? Well, normally what the officers want to see is that you do have sufficient ties to the country where you're coming from, right? So that you have, basically, if you have nothing to lose by staying in Canada, okay, and everything to gain by staying in Canada, that will weigh in their decision, okay? So what you might want to show is that you have a job in Canada and your boss has given you leave to come to Canada. If you're an entrepreneur, you own your own business, then you may want to show that you have proof of your ownership of your business, proof of ownership of, property is okay, but just because you have property doesn't mean that someone, has a lot of ties, but it's something to add to that, okay? But really, proof that you're employed, proof that you own your business, these are all very good documents to show that you have ties to your country, okay? They also want you to make sure that you actually have sufficient funds to travel. Does this, it's not cheap to come to Canada. You're paying a lot for this. Does this match with your financial situation? Okay. So normally we ask to provide bank statements of up to 6 months. Because oftentimes people might be able to just borrow a huge sum of money and put it in their account and say, hey, I have money, right? So what the officers do is they look at your bank statements and they see, okay, does your amount of money, if you have a large deposit of money, well, where did it come from? Why do you have a large amount of money? Okay. You can also show other assets and other financial support. Okay. Travel to other countries, especially Western countries, is also a good indication that you would leave Canada. If you've traveled to other countries and you haven't overstayed, right? That's very good. If you have traveled to other countries and you have overstayed, there is a question on the form as to whether or not you have overstayed. And Canada, especially with the US, shares a lot of information. And if you have overstayed in the US and it's on the records for the US, likely the officer in Canada will also be able to note that. And you'll have to explain about that. If you lie on your form, that will, and the officer can see that you've lied, that will normally result in rejection of your visa. Okay, so explanations of previous rejections. If you have already applied to Canada before for a visa, or other countries like the US, you have a rejection, you should explain why it is that you were rejected. And like I said before, be sure to answer all of the questions accurately. Okay. A lot of times people are counseled, oh, just answer questions this way and you're more likely to get it through. But if you do misrepresent on your application, it's a very, very bad mark in your application. And trying to rectify that later can be very, very problematic. Okay, so my advice to you, answer all of the questions accurately, provide explanations of your previous rejections. Certainly previous rejections will make your application harder to qualify, but it's not impossible if you can explain it in a reasonable way. So what happens if my visa or ETA is rejected? First of all, oftentimes applications can be rejected with unreasonable reasons. And one of the best ways to combat this is to go to federal court. There are strict deadlines for going to federal court. If your application is made outside of Canada, so for most of you, it will be if you have applied for a visa outside of Canada, the application deadline is 60 days from the date that you received the negative decision. If it's made inside Canada, it's 15 days. Okay, so we have to file the notice to the federal court and the government that we want to challenge the decision. Oftentimes, when we go to federal court, if the decision is very unreasonable, the government's lawyers, they may come back to us and say, you know what, we agree with you, it's going to be settled, we did agree to be settled. And whether you win at federal court or if it's settled, it will go back to the visa post for get another look at by another officer. Okay. If you are past your deadlines, what we can do is we can still get a copy of your file. It's very important to get a copy of your file because that is where the real reasons are. And we can file to get a copy of your immigration file. It takes oftentimes 30 days or sometimes even longer to do. So, if you want to come to collision and you've had a rejection, we have to start doing this very, very fast. Okay. And then afterwards, you can reapply. I'm just going to caution you, though, to reapply very carefully. Every time you apply and you have a rejection, it reflects badly on your file, okay? So if you want to reapply again, don't just, do it randomly and just think if I submit the exact same thing, a different result is gonna happen. Because the officers will be looking into your immigration file and they'll see if it was a rejection before and there's no real change to your application, it's very likely that you will be rejected again, okay? So it's not that you shouldn't reapply, but you need to reapply very carefully, and I would highly advise that you seek proper counsel from a qualified immigration lawyer to do so, okay? So that's it for my quick presentation on this. I've included our information on there. Adel and Carolyn, are you there?
I'm here.
Yes, and I'm here too. Thanks, Elizabeth.
No problem. I'm wondering if we can just go through a few questions that may have cropped up here. Adel, do you have some questions at all to ask?
Yeah, so I have a couple questions that I want to ask that we're seeing come up on the Q&A. The first one's an interesting one that's come up a couple times. So it's from people who are looking to attend the Collision conference as sponsor companies. So they're going to be running booths, networking, things like that. And people want to know, is that equal to working in Canada, and do they need a work permit to do that?
Mm-hmm. So oftentimes, if you're coming to Canada and you are, running a sponsored booth and you're basically, you're speaking at a conference, it falls within the realm of, it could be considered work, but it falls within the realm of work without a work permit, more in the realm of the business visitor. So you don't necessarily need to have a work permit to do so. But you should declare what you are going to be doing on your visa application, and at the border, when the officer asks you, you can let them know as well.
Another question that we've been getting quite a bit is people are going to be coming as entire workplaces. So they want to know, is it better to apply as a group or individually, or is there an option to apply as a group?
There isn't necessarily a box that you can tick to say I'm applying as a group. That being said, you can certainly have your company issue a letter saying that these people are all coming as part of our company as a group, and each person, when you submit your application online, you include that letter. So the officers will be alerted to the fact that as a group, you guys are, coming together. Oftentimes, if we're submitting it by paper, we can just put everything into one package and submit it together as a group. But oftentimes, I do find that online can be a lot simpler to do, and sometimes it's a little bit quicker to do than by paper.
Perfect. Another question that I'm getting, which is often one that we get with visa applications, is when should I apply? When is the best time to make sure that I can get it in time for the conference?
I would say, and this is one of the reasons we decided to have this webinar so early, better earlier than later. You should start applying now. If you have your ticket, you'll get your letter. And submit it now, because you never know what might happen. If an application is complicated and it's held, for example, even an ETA can be held for several months, right? Or a visa, or if it's rejected, you want to have some time to be able to address this. Carolyn, speaking of letters, can you explain how people can get that letter from Collision?
Sure, of course. No, that's a great question. So once you have secured your ticket to Collision, we would be happy to provide you with a letter that confirms your attendance at Collision, or at least confirms your intent to attend Collision. So the good news is you'll be able to generate this letter yourself using what's known as our attendee portal. Now, we do send this out quite regularly in our email newsletters, but if you're missing the link or you need some help navigating through that portal, you can write into our support team. I'll pop the address in the box here, but it's info@collisionconf.com. Once you're logged into that portal, you'll see an option on the right-hand side to request a confirmation letter. And as long as you have a valid ticket for Collision in this coming year, it's quite easy to generate that letter. We'll ask you for a couple of details, including your name, your email, your date of birth, nationality, the passport number, and your country of origin. And we'll then email you a PDF of this letter. And that letter then serves as a formal confirmation of your attendance, as I said. It's a very simple template. It simply confirms that you have purchased a ticket, when the event will take place and where. And there's also a little disclaimer piece in there that I'd just like to make clear as well, that we don't act as an advocate in your case or in your visa application process. So it simply says that you are attending Collision, but that we aren't responsible for you while you're in Canada. And we know that some attendees can get confused over that terminology sometimes. So if you're looking to list somebody as a sponsor or a host, unfortunately, Collision is not able to provide that guarantee, but that's why you'll see that piece in the letter as well. But apart from that, it's super simple. The letter arrives almost immediately, provided you haven't any typos and you've your correct email address. And if you have any difficulties or you need to reissue that letter, again, our support team will be able to help there.
And, you know, getting to that point you said about sponsorship, there is no such thing as a sponsor for a visitor visa. You know, sometimes if you're visiting families, your family member will issue an invite letter. But no one, immigration doesn't hold anyone responsible for someone when they're coming to Canada. The immigration will always look at each individual and see whether or not they themselves can be trusted. Okay, so don't feel like, oh, you know, Collision, you know, you're saying that you're not sponsoring me. There is no such thing as a sponsorship anyway. The letters that the Collision Conference provides, that is enough to show your purpose to come to Canada. You'll have to, each person will have to prove on their own, you know, using the factors that I spoke of, that you have the intended purpose to come to Canada and leave Canada afterwards when you're supposed to, etc. Okay? Okay.
We have one last question.
One last question.
It's the burning question that's everywhere right now, is the effect of coronavirus on applying for visas. As we know, in China, for example, right now has shut down all the visa application centers, and hopefully things don't get worse, but if they do, we can see this repeated in other countries. So how is the Canadian government responding to this, and how do we apply for visas if there's no visa application centers open in the country we're in?
Yes. So the Canadian government, they actually have a post on you know, their policy with regard to the coronavirus. I didn't include that in the link, but it is on our LinkedIn and Facebook pages. So feel free to go there. Basically, right now you can still submit your applications online. Okay, and then if afterwards, if you are applying for a visa in China, for example, and the visa application center is closed, so you can't submit your passport when your application is approved. So if you submit it online, they will go through the process where they ask you to go for your biometrics, and they can also approve your application online. But if you aren't able to do your biometrics or submit your passport yet, you can just wait, and they will extend the time, the deadlines for doing the biometrics and submitting your passport until the time that the visa application centers are open. Hopefully, you know, it won't be forever that they're closed, and they'll open well in time for the Collision Conference. And you can then submit your passport and do your biometrics. But I would certainly recommend that even if you are in China, to submit your application earlier rather than wait until afterwards, because there is going to be a long lineup afterwards for your applications to be decided. And the earlier you submit your application, the further along the line you are for your application to be assessed when the application center is open.
Okay, thanks a lot, Elizabeth. I just want everybody else to know that there were some other questions. We didn't get a chance to do them live, but I will be answering them individually and typing in answers for those people.
And you do have our information on there. We are offering Collision members a discount on the consultation fees as well, if you want to have a personal consultation on your own situation. So please feel free to contact us if you have any more questions. Thank you guys so much. It was wonderful being here, and thank you, Carolyn and Collision. I think this is a wonderful thing that you're doing to help people you know, learn how to come to Canada. We hope to see you in Canada very soon. Okay, take care, guys.
Bye, see you all in the summer.
Okay, bye.